She laughed right in my face. Not a nervous laugh, not a polite one, but the kind that's sharp, careless, and meant to sting. We were sitting at a restaurant table with a few of her friends, the kind of people who measured success by job titles and car logos. I had just finished explaining my plan for the startup I was building, how I'd left my job at the firm and decided to go all in. I was proud of it. It wasn't glamorous yet, but it was mine. Her name's Claire. Back then, she was my girlfriend. She leaned back in her chair, swirling the straw in her drink, and said, "A startup? You mean you're unemployed?" Her friends burst into quiet laughter. I didn't flinch. I remember the exact sound of the ice in her glass shifting when she said it. That tiny clink that followed her mockery, like punctuation on humiliation. I smiled, nodded, and said, "Yeah, that's one way to see it." But inside, I marked the moment. Some words don't fade. They stay branded into you, waiting for their time. Claire always loved showing off. She worked at a big marketing firm downtown. Good salary, big office, her name on a frosted glass door. She liked people to know it, too. When she introduced me to her colleagues, she'd say, "This is Evan. He's working on a project." Always with that half smile that said, "Don't ask too much, he's figuring things out." But that night at dinner was different. That was the first time she didn't bother hiding the contempt. Maybe it was the wine, maybe it was the attention of her friends. Either way, she said exactly what she thought of me. The rest of the evening was a blur. I kept my composure, paid the bill, even walked her to her car afterward. She said I was being quiet. I told her I was just thinking. What I didn't tell her was that I'd already made a decision. I was done trying to prove my worth to her. See, the thing about people like Claire is that they only respect results. They don't see the work, the risk, or the sleepless nights. They see the headlines after the battle's won, not the blood spilled before it. She didn't believe in me because she couldn't imagine me as someone who might win. The next morning, I woke up early, made coffee, and went back to my small rented workspace. It wasn't much, 2 desks, 1 laptop, and a whiteboard full of half-formed ideas, but it was where I felt alive. Every mark on that board was a piece of something I was building from nothing. That day, I stopped trying to convince her. I stopped defending myself. Her laughter wasn't an insult anymore, it was fuel. I didn't tell her this, but the startup she mocked wasn't just an idea. It already had early traction, 2 beta clients, both small logistics companies testing our AI routing system. Nothing big, but real. I knew the product worked. I just needed time, and I was willing to give it everything. When Claire called later that week, she apologized for being too harsh. Said she didn't mean to embarrass me, that she just wanted me to be realistic. I told her not to worry about it. My voice was calm, even friendly. But as I hung up, I realized that was the last time I'd ever explained myself to anyone who didn't believe in me. People talk about betrayal like it's loud, shouting, breaking, fighting. But sometimes it's quiet. It's a laugh across the table, a tone that tells you they've already decided what you'll become. And in that moment, sitting alone in that tiny workspace, I decided exactly who I would become, not to prove her wrong, but to make sure I never again needed validation from someone like her. I just didn't know then how far that decision would take me, or how small she'd look when our paths crossed again. The weeks after that dinner were quieter between me and Claire. She didn't leave, but something changed. You know when someone stops believing in you. You feel it in the pauses, in how their eyes drift when you talk. She still came around, still smiled when we went out, but her words carried this thin layer of condescension now, like she was being patient with a child chasing a phase. Every time I mentioned the startup, she'd tilt her head and say, "That's nice, babe. But don't you think you should have a backup plan? Just in case this thing doesn't take off?" "This thing," she said, as if it were a hobby, not my life's work. I didn't argue. I never do when I know time's on my side. I just kept building. The days started blending together, long coding sprints, late nights testing algorithms, client calls from a borrowed office chair that squeaked every time I moved. I lived on takeout and caffeine, and I didn't mind one bit. The product was getting better. Clients were happy. The data looked promising. Meanwhile, Claire was climbing. Promotions came her way. She'd come home with stories about office politics, new campaigns, clients who paid more for her smile than her strategy. She loved the recognition. I think that's when the gap between us became visible. I was still underground, digging tunnels, while she was standing on stage waving to the crowd. One night, she came home late. I was working at the desk, lost in code, and she dropped her bag on the couch with a sigh. "Evan," she said, "I got offered a regional position." "That's great," I said without looking up. She hesitated, then added, "It's in Chicago." That got my attention. I turned my chair around. "You're taking it?" "I'm thinking about it," she said, crossing her arms. "It's a big step. But honestly, I need stability. You know?" That word, stability, hit harder than it should have. I nodded slowly. "You think I'm unstable because I'm building something?" "I think you're gambling," she said. "And I'm not 22 anymore. I can't live off dreams and ramen noodles." I remember looking at her then, perfectly dressed, hair tied, tired eyes, and realizing that whatever bond we once had was gone. We weren't partners anymore. We were two people measuring each other's worth in different currencies. The next morning, she was gone before I woke up. There was a note on the counter that said, "I need to figure out what I really want." I didn't reply. I didn't call. Because truthfully, I already knew what I wanted, and it wasn't someone who measured my future by my current income. A month passed. Then two. I poured every ounce of frustration, hurt, and silence into my work. I started hiring a junior developer, then a data analyst. We were still small, but the momentum was real now. A logistics company in Ohio signed a year-long contract. Then another one in Nevada. Suddenly, our name started floating in small tech circles. I remember sitting at that same desk one night, staring at the first deposit notification, $50,000. Not investor money, real revenue. Proof that we weren't just an idea anymore. I took a screenshot, stared at it for a while, and smiled. I thought of her laugh, the one that started all of this, and realized I didn't even feel anger anymore. Just focus. The funny part is, the universe doesn't need your permission to balance things. It just waits, quietly. And while I was building my future in silence, Claire was unknowingly walking straight toward hers. Growth doesn't announce itself. It creeps in quietly, disguised as long nights and small wins that nobody else notices. That's how it started for me. By the third quarter, our revenue had doubled, then tripled. We weren't a startup running on fumes anymore. We were profitable, debt-free, and attracting attention from investors I once thought were out of reach. But I didn't rush to tell anyone, especially not Claire. There's a certain peace in being underestimated. No one expects anything from you, and that gives you room to move, to build, to learn, to prepare. I remember the day our third client, a mid-sized freight company, called to expand their contract. They wanted to integrate our system company-wide. It was the kind of call that shifts everything. I hung up and just sat there in the quiet, realizing I didn't owe a single person an explanation anymore. Later that evening, I drove past the same restaurant where Claire once laughed at me. The signboard had changed, but the memory didn't. I could still see her face in my mind. That smirk, that careless confidence. I smiled, not with bitterness, but with understanding. Some people mock what they don't have the courage to build. Around that time, the company moved into its first real office. 2 glass walls, a small conference room, the hum of computers filling the air. It smelled like new paint and ambition. I hired 4 more people, all younger, hungrier, brilliant in their own ways. They didn't know the story behind the company's name, very sense, but I did. It came from a Latin phrase meaning truth made visible. I thought it fit perfectly. While the company was climbing, Claire reached out again. I hadn't heard from her in nearly a year. Her message came out of nowhere. A simple, "Hey, just wondering how you've been. Saw one of your posts. Looks like you're doing well," smiley face. I didn't respond, but I did look at her profile. She was still in Chicago, or at least she had been. Her posts had shifted tone. Less glamour, more quotes about resilience and starting over. I scrolled a bit too far and saw a tagged photo of her at a small event. No fancy clothes, no team around her, just her standing by a booth for a marketing agency I'd never heard of. That told me everything. The regional role hadn't lasted. Still, I didn't feel joy in it. Just clarity. The kind that settles in when life quietly proves your point for you. A few months later, I got invited to speak at a local entrepreneurship forum. Nothing huge, just a panel of founders sharing their journeys. I almost turned it down, but something in me said yes. When I arrived, I recognized the host's assistant right away. She used to work with Claire. She blinked when she saw me, then smiled awkwardly and said, "Oh wow, you're the founder of Very Sense? Claire used to mention you." "Yeah," I said, keeping my tone even. "She said you had big dreams." the woman replied. Guess she was right. That was all. A small sentence, but it carried more weight than any apology could. By the end of that year, VeriSense had crossed its first million in profit. We'd landed partnerships with major shipping networks, and investors were circling like vultures with gold-plated checkbooks. But I wasn't interested in being bought. Not yet. I wanted to grow this thing properly, brick by brick, until no one could take it from me. And while all this was happening, I never once reached out to Claire. Not to gloat, not to boast. Because true revenge doesn't need an audience. It lives in the silence of progress. Still, life has a way of riding full circles when you least expect it. And mine was about to draw one. Perfectly, painfully, right back to her. It was almost poetic how it happened. Not planned, not forced. Just life, quiet, indifferent, and strangely precise. By the time VeriSense moved into our new headquarters, we had 70 employees and a cafeteria that could feed them all. The building wasn't massive, but it was ours. Clean lines, polished concrete. The kind of space that still smelled faintly of ambition and fresh coffee. I'd walk through those halls some mornings before anyone arrived. Just me and the low hum of servers, and think back to the first day I worked from a desk that barely fit a laptop. That's when the contract with Silvaline Staffing came in. They handled facility management, maintenance, cleaning, cafeteria services. I approved it without much thought. Just paperwork, another vendor. A few weeks later, our office manager mentioned that the new cafeteria staff had started. I nodded and went back to my emails. Nothing special. Until that Thursday afternoon. I was grabbing a late lunch, grilled chicken, rice, nothing fancy, when I heard someone drop a tray behind the counter. The sound made me turn. And there she was. Claire. For a second, I thought my mind was playing tricks. She looked smaller somehow. Thinner. Her hair tied back under a cafeteria cap. The polish that used to define her, the tailored dresses, the red lipstick, the confidence that could fill a room, it was all gone. She froze when she saw me. The color drained from her face. Evan, she said, almost whispering. I didn't answer right away. I just studied her. The woman who once told me I was unemployed, who laughed at my dream in front of her friends, was now standing behind a counter, wiping down trays in my company's cafeteria. Finally, I nodded. Hey, Claire. Her lips parted slightly, like she didn't know whether to smile or hide. I didn't know this was your company. Most people didn't, I said simply. For a long second, neither of us spoke. The air felt heavy, and all around us the noise of employees chatting over lunch blurred into background static. She looked down, then back up at me. You did it, she said quietly. You actually built it. I told you I would. Her eyes dropped again. She gave a small, forced laugh. Not mockery this time, but shame. Guess I was wrong about you. I smiled faintly. Yeah, guess so. I didn't stay long after that. I took my tray, thanked the cashier, and walked out. My heart wasn't racing. There was no satisfaction, no victory parade. Just a calm understanding that life had taken care of what I never could have said out loud. Over the next few weeks, I saw her a few times in passing. Always polite, always quiet. She avoided eye contact at first, then started giving small nods whenever we crossed paths. She worked hard, I'll give her that. Always on time, always focused. But every time I saw her in that uniform, I remembered that dinner table, the laughter, the dismissive tone, the feeling of being looked down on. And I realized something important. I didn't hate her. I didn't even pity her. I just felt done. Still, part of me wondered what happened, how she ended up here. So one evening, after most people had left, I walked down to the cafeteria. Claire was cleaning tables. She looked up, startled. I'm not here to bother you, I said. Just checking in. She hesitated. It's fine. I was just finishing up. There was a pause, awkward, heavy. Then she said quietly, I lost my job last year. The Chicago firm downsized. Tried to start something on my own, but it didn't work. Bills piled up. I moved back here. She didn't ask for sympathy. She didn't make excuses. Just facts. Straight, bare, real. I see, I said. That must have been hard. She nodded. Yeah, it was. For a moment, her eyes met mine. There was no arrogance in them anymore, just exhaustion. Maybe regret. I didn't say what I was thinking, that it was hard for me too, once. That I knew what it felt like to start from nothing while someone you loved laughed at you for trying. But I didn't need to. The silence said enough. And as I turned to leave, I realized this wasn't the ending yet. Life doesn't stop at poetic irony. It keeps twisting until every lesson lands exactly where it should. I had no idea then, but that final turn was already on its way. A month passed before Claire said more than 2 words to me again. I'd see her sometimes in the cafeteria, head down, polite smile, eyes avoiding mine. She blended in with the staff easily, too easily for someone who used to light up boardrooms. It was strange watching her move quietly through a space that once would have been beneath her. One afternoon, I stayed late at the office. Most of the lights were off except the ones near my desk. I went downstairs for coffee, and there she was, wiping the counter. The place was empty, just the sound of the coffee machine humming and rain tapping against the glass. She looked up, hesitant. "You're still here." "Yeah," I said. "I work better when it's quiet." She gave a small nod, then went back to wiping. But after a pause, she said softly, "I wanted to say something, if that's okay." I turned slightly. "Go ahead." She set the cloth down, exhaled, and said, "I'm sorry. For before. For the things I said. I was stupid back then." Her voice didn't shake, but it carried something that hadn't been there before, honesty. The kind that comes when life's already done its punishing. I didn't rush to answer. I just let her speak. "I thought success was about money and titles," she continued. "I thought people who didn't have them weren't serious. You were always so calm, so focused. I mistook that for weakness." She laughed once, quietly. Turns out, it was strength. I just couldn't see it. Her words didn't sting. They didn't even move me much. I'd already gone through all the stages: hurt, anger, indifference. What was left was understanding. "Life has a way of teaching lessons," I said. She nodded, eyes low. "Yeah, some of us just learn late." I didn't say anything more. I took my coffee and started walking away. But before I reached the door, she called after me. "Evan." I stopped, turned halfway. "Do you ever think about us? About how it could have been different?" That question hung there longer than I expected. I could have said yes. I could have said no. But I didn't know her either answer. "I think about what it taught me," I said. "That's enough." I left it at that. Over the next few weeks, she started finding reasons to cross paths with me. Casual greetings at first, then short conversations that stretched longer each time. She'd bring me coffee when I was working late, sometimes a sandwich, saying, "You probably skipped dinner again." It wasn't manipulation, not this time. It was regret, dressed in small gestures. I could see it in her eyes every time she looked at me. The realization that she had burned the bridge that led to the very life she used to dream of. But here's the thing. Regret doesn't rebuild anything. It only haunts. My team didn't know who she was. To them, she was just another cafeteria worker. And I let it stay that way. She didn't need a story told in whispers. She'd already lived enough of that. Then one day, during a company lunch, one of the interns mentioned her name out loud. "Claire," just casual conversation, and someone asked, "Wait, wasn't she some big marketing exec before?" Claire froze. The room went silent. I could feel everyone's eyes shifting between her and me, waiting for my reaction. I simply said, "People change careers. It happens." She glanced up, caught my eye for a brief moment, and I saw the gratitude there, and the shame. That moment closed something quietly inside me. I didn't hate her anymore. I didn't even want her to feel small. I just wanted peace. Still, I could tell she wasn't done. There was something brewing behind those quiet apologies. Something she wanted to ask, but hadn't yet dared to say. And when she finally did, it would change everything about how I saw her, and what I decided to do next. It happened on a Thursday night, the kind of night when the office felt too still. Everyone had left hours earlier, and I was finishing up reports in my glass-walled corner office. Outside, the parking lot glowed under streetlights and the rain had just started again, soft and steady. A faint knock came at the door. I looked up. It was Claire, still in her cafeteria uniform, holding an umbrella that dripped water onto the floor. "Hey," she said quietly. "Do you have a minute?" I nodded, motioned for her to come in. She closed the door behind her, hesitated by the chair, and then sat down like she wasn't sure she had the right to. "What's on your mind?" I asked. She clasped her hands, looking down at them. "I don't know how to say this without sounding desperate." I leaned back, waiting. "I've been trying to get back into marketing," she said. "It's been hard. My old contacts have moved on, and no one wants to hire someone who's been out of the industry this long." I was wondering. She trailed off, then looked up. "If there's a place for me here. Not anything fancy. I just thought maybe I could help. You know, with branding or PR? There it was, the question hanging between us. The one she'd been circling for weeks. I didn't speak right away. I studied her. The same woman who once called me unemployed, now sitting across from me asking for a job in my company. There was no arrogance in her anymore. Just exhaustion and quiet humility. Claire, I said finally, I'm not sure that would be a good idea. Her shoulders sank. Because of the past? Because of perception, I said calmly. You working here already blurs enough lines. Putting you in a higher position would make it worse, for both of us. She nodded slowly, biting her lip. I understand. I shouldn't have asked. She stood to leave, but I stopped her. You didn't do anything wrong by asking, I said. You're allowed to try again. Just maybe not here. She looked at me for a moment, a long, searching look, then whispered, You really have changed. Maybe, I said. Or maybe I just learned to stop proving myself. She gave a small nod, eyes glassy, then walked out. I watched her cross the lobby, umbrella in hand, disappearing into the rain. I sat there a long while after she left. Not angry, not smug, just thoughtful. There was something deeply human about watching someone fall from grace and still trying to climb back up with dignity. And for the first time since that night she laughed at me, I felt something close to empathy. The next morning, I asked HR to quietly find her a referral contact, a small marketing firm we partnered with on a few campaigns. Nothing dramatic, no favors, just a chance. They reached out the following week, and by some mix of timing and goodwill, Claire got an interview. A real one. She came by my office that afternoon, holding a printed letter. You didn't have to do this, she said softly. I know, I replied. But I did. She smiled faintly, a fragile, grateful smile. I don't know how to thank you. Don't, I said. Just make it count this time. She nodded, then left. For a few days after that, I didn't see her at all. I assumed she was preparing for the interview. The cafeteria felt quieter without her, which was strange, considering how little she spoke before. Then one morning, I got a small envelope slid under my office door. Inside was a note in her handwriting. Thank you for reminding me what respect looks like. I start next week. I won't forget this. Claire. I folded the note and placed it in my drawer. I didn't reply. There was nothing more to say. I thought that was the end of our story. Clean, resolved, poetic in its own way. But I was wrong. Because 2 months later, life found a way to bring her name back into my world again. And this time, not as a coincidence, but as a test. And that's when I realized I hadn't delivered the final blow yet. 2 months later, I got an email from our procurement department. A new marketing agency had pitched to handle VerySense's next product launch. I skimmed through the presentation and froze when I saw the logo at the top. Novareach Marketing. Claire's new company. I leaned back in my chair and let out a slow breath. The irony was surgical. Life had a way of putting people back in front of you, not for revenge, but for closure. The proposal was solid. Clean strategy, reasonable budget. Clearly, she'd done her homework. But what caught my eye was the name at the bottom of the presentation, Lead Account Manager, Claire Henson. She'd climbed fast. Faster than I expected. Later that week, we scheduled a presentation. I didn't tell anyone about our history. No one in my company even knew we'd ever dated. I wanted this to be strictly business. When the day came, she walked into the boardroom with 2 colleagues. She looked different this time. Confident again, but not the same brand of confidence she used to wear like armor. This one was quieter, steadier, earned. When her eyes met mine, there was a flicker of surprise, but she didn't flinch. Mr. Lane, she said formally, extending her hand. Good to see you again. I shook it. Likewise, Miss Henson. Please, take your seat. She went through her presentation flawlessly. Data, visuals, projections, crisp, professional. You could tell she'd put her entire self into this. And for a moment, I almost forgot the history between us. Almost. When she finished, the room fell silent. My team turned to me for feedback. I leaned forward slightly and asked one question. Claire, do you believe in this project? She blinked. Yes, of course. I mean really believe in it, I said. Because belief is what separates people who sell ideas from people who build them. You once told me chasing a dream without security was foolish. The room went still. Her colleagues looked confused. She didn't break eye contact. I was wrong, she said softly. I learned that the hard way. I nodded once. Good. Because at VerySense, we don't work with people who play it safe. We work with those who risk something real. Then I looked to my operations manager. Approve the contract. Let's give Novarich a trial run. There was a faint ripple of surprise around the table. Claire's face didn't move, but her eyes gave her away. Shock, relief, maybe something deeper. The meeting ended. Everyone filed out. She lingered behind. You didn't have to say yes, she said quietly once the room was empty. I didn't say yes for you, I replied. I said yes for the work. She nodded slowly, eyes glistening. Still, thank you. I stood, walked past her, and paused at the door. Claire, I said, turning slightly. You once laughed when I told you I was building something that mattered. Now you're part of helping it grow. Life's funny like that. She didn't answer, just stood there. Tears she refused to let fall caught in her lashes. Over the next few months, Novarich handled our account well. Their campaigns boosted engagement beyond projections. Objectively, she delivered. I kept things professional, but I could feel the shift in her every time she came in for meetings. Her tone softened. Her eyes stayed respectful. One evening, after our quarterly review, she waited outside my office. Evan, she said, I just wanted to tell you I got promoted. Senior Account Director. That's good, I said. You've earned it. She smiled faintly. I wouldn't have gotten here without the chance you gave me. I shook my head. You got here because you finally stopped trying to prove yourself to everyone else. She looked at me for a long moment, then said, You've changed, Evan. You're colder, but stronger. Not colder, I said. Just clearer. She nodded, smiled sadly, and walked away. That was the last time I saw her in person. 3 months later, Novarich went under. Their main investor pulled funding after a bad merger. I heard through contacts that the company folded overnight. Most of their team found new jobs quickly, except Claire. I didn't reach out, not out of malice, but because I'd already said everything I needed to without words. And yet, fate wasn't finished with its circles. Because half a year later, when VeriSense opened our new branch downtown, I walked into the cafeteria on the first morning, and there she was again. Same uniform, same quiet eyes. This time, she didn't try to hide. Good morning, Mr. Lane, she said softly. I nodded once. Morning, Claire. And for the first time since this story began, I felt the full weight of it settle. This, right here, was the final blow. Not delivered by words, or pride, or payback, but by life itself. There's a saying I once heard, some debts are paid in silence. I never really understood it until that morning. The cafeteria smelled of coffee and new beginnings. Employees filled the room, laughing, talking, starting their day. And there was Claire, behind the counter, steady, composed, doing her job without complaint. The same woman who once smirked at my dream now handed people their breakfast with quiet grace. She noticed me before I spoke. Her smile was faint but real. You're here early, she said. I usually am, I replied. Her voice was different now. Softer, grounded. The edge she once carried. The need to impress, to dominate every room, it was gone. In its place was something almost peaceful. How have you been? I asked. She hesitated, then said, Better than I deserve. I nodded slowly. There was no cruelty in my chest, no urge to remind her of the past. That moment at the restaurant, the laughter, the years between us, they all felt like ghosts that had already faded. What was left wasn't revenge. It was understanding. I took my coffee, and before I turned away, she said quietly, Evan, I'm proud of you. It stopped me. For a second, I didn't know what to say. Thank you, I said finally. You helped more than you think. She frowned slightly. I didn't help you. Sure you did, I said. You just didn't mean to. For a moment, our eyes met, and I saw in her something raw, honest, and human. Not regret. Acceptance. The kind that comes when you finally stop fighting the truth of your own story. I left the cafeteria and went back to my office. The skyline stretched outside my window, sunlight catching on glass towers that hadn't existed when this journey started. I sat there thinking about everything. The failure, the laughter, the loneliness, the long nights no one saw. People always think revenge is about payback, about proving someone wrong. But the truth is, the most powerful revenge isn't loud. It's the quiet dignity of success that doesn't need an audience. It's waking up every day and knowing you didn't break, even when someone tried to convince you that you would. Claire stayed on at the cafeteria. She never asked for favors, never looked for sympathy. She just worked. Honestly, quietly. the same way I once did when no one believed in me. And maybe that was life's way of giving her the same lesson it gave me, just from the other side. A few months later, she handed in her resignation, left a short note on the manager's desk. Thank you for the opportunity. Time for me to build something of my own. I found out through HR. I didn't call her. Didn't need to. I knew she meant it. The next morning, I walked through the empty cafeteria before the staff arrived. Her station was spotless. Everything folded, cleaned, and neatly stacked. On the counter, tucked under a coffee cup, was a folded napkin with 2 words written in neat handwriting. Full circle. I smiled. One of those quiet smiles that carries years inside it. Then I tucked the note into my jacket pocket and walked back upstairs. Because that was the thing about circles. They don't end where they start. They end when both people finally understand why they met in the first place. And in the end, it wasn't about who won or who lost. It was about who learned. Claire mocked my startup once. Now she'd lived through its shadow, felt its weight, and walked away wiser. And me? I'd finally learned that the greatest victories don't come from proving someone wrong. They come from never letting their doubt define who you are. That was the final blow. Not the sight of her behind that counter, but the peace in knowing I didn't need to crush her to stand tall. I already had, by becoming everything she said I couldn't be, and doing it without hate in my heart. That's where real power lies. In silence. In growth. In moving forward without looking back. Dear listeners, our story has come to an end. If you enjoyed it, please subscribe, leave a like, and share your thoughts in the comments.